Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And we are just about to get the 2041 to 2042 off-season underway. Last time around, we did our annual roster review and started planning for this upcoming off-season. This time around, we're going to check in on some of the top prospects in baseball, check in on some of our former players and see what they have done around the league this past year. And then probably the two most important things we're going to do, we're going to check in depth on our farm system and plans for the player development lab. And then we're going to finish off shopping a few of the players that we may consider moving on from this off season, just to give our loyal viewers and the worldwide scouting department a look at potential returns for some of the guys who may have played their last game in an Oakland Athletics uniform. If you're new to the channel, definitely appreciate you giving us a try. And if you're one of our loyal viewers, thank you for coming back. Always appreciate interaction in the comment section to each episode. Learn a lot, and there's a lot to be learned for those who read through the comments with some of the discussions that end up being happened between myself and other members of the worldwide scouting department. And always appreciate a new subscriber and or a thumbs up on an episode as well to help others find our little tiny corner of the interweb here. And we'll start off this episode checking out some of the prospects in baseball that we've thought about picking in previous drafts and or previous IAFA periods, see where these guys end up. Alvaro Cepeda, a guy that we laid off on, I think primarily because of his very negative personality, is certainly now an established major leaguer at the age of 25 in Cleveland. Put up a 114 WRC plus this year. 15 homers, 51 ribbies, did have 17 doubles and 3 triples also in 375 at-bats. Very good defensive outfielder as well with a solid bat, added up to a 3.3 WAR, which was down materially from his much stronger first full season in the majors in 2040. Given his fragility and given his personality, although he'd likely be a upgrade for us defensively at catcher and at center field, and arguably a small upgrade offensively at center field, I think the potential mix that we are looking for next year with likely Armstrong and perhaps Aguilar and Harmon supporting him is probably a better overall path for us to be following. Cepeda has already signed an 8-year extension for $154 million, so he's also at the point where he's getting very expensive very quickly. Cameron Rhodes, a guy who went 24th overall in 2036 that we certainly investigated at the time, had a nice year for the Rockies, a 118 WRC plus a 3.1 WAR. So when all was said and done, pretty similar production, but he got there in a different way. Was out in the outfield for Colorado almost every day of the year. Led the league with 13 doubles, 13 triples. Also had 36 doubles and 21 homers. 835 OPS. Not quite as good defensively. He's a left fielder, but is a switch hitter with some very positive personality traits. Although Rhodes, too, like Cepeda, is fragile physically. Kurt Hall, potential two-way second baseman, is listed as the number 28 prospect in baseball now. 8-4 with a 2.82 ERA in A-ball for the Down East Wood Ducks in the Carolina League. As a hitter this past year, hit just 227, but he did have 17 homers and 18 doubles. Basically was a league average offensive player. So certainly a nice combination of solid pitching, solid hitting, good defense. Kurt Hall is someone we may regret missing out on a little bit down the line. Alexis Campos, 20-year-old IAFA signing from 2038. Had a pretty mixed personality, but he was liked very much by some members of the worldwide scouting department, and certainly was liked more by some members of the worldwide scouting department than myself, since we did not end up with him. Solid defensively, outstanding speed, but he definitely struggled after he got promoted to A-ball this year, putting up just a 55 WRC plus and 273 at-bats. That being said, he still hasn't even turned 21 yet. Really question his home run power and his ability to draw walks. Drew just 6 walks in 76 starts in A-ball. So although seems like he's going to potentially get to a point where he's a real good contact hitter and knocking a lot of line drives into the gaps all around the field, the lack of home run power and a very poor eye could ultimately minimize what he can accomplish in his career. We looked and considered in the last draft at Juan Monsalve's outstanding defensive prospect. The question with him was whether he could come close to hitting at the major league level. He ended up going in the 3rd round. We probably would have maybe taken a flyer on him in the 5th, possibly in the 4th, depending on how the draft broke, but not an option for us. He is a 22-year-old out of UC Santa Barbara, had a monster game or a monster performance in his 2 games, including 1 start in rookie ball with a couple of hits, a couple of walks, and a 264 WRC plus. Unfortunately, he really struggled in A-ball, hitting just a $176 and 68 at-bats, and he was a below-average offensive player. The glove, though, definitely not a question. 7.1 zone rating and a ridiculous 1.148 defensive efficiency at shortstop. So the big question with Monsalve remains whether he will be able to hit enough to actually be a major league ball player someday. And then 3 younger everyday prospects. Adalberto Bacias, an IAFA signing from this past spring, second baseman in the Pittsburgh organization, but at 17 years old, did not play at all this year. Still looks like he could be a very effective contact and power combination, listed as the number 73 prospect in baseball, and he was certainly someone who was highly regarded by members of the worldwide scouting department. And can definitely say the same thing about Juan Bonilla, another guy we thought seriously about. The switch-hitting infielder, again, at the complex for his team, which in his case is with the Miami organization. Last but not least, Juan Villa, picked in the 5th round of this past draft. This was a guy with first-round grades on him who was looking for a fair amount of money, and given our focus on trying to turn a profit this year and ultimately get a bigger budget, which did work out as we turned a profit of a little less than $2 million and got a $6 million boost to the budget. So since we had an early exit from the playoffs this year, likely would not have been profitable this year if we had gone for Villa. He did end up signing in late August with the Blue Jays organization for the $6 million he was looking for, but ultimately did not play at all, so he will not be making his professional debut until next year when he'll be over 19 years old. Turn now to a couple more pitchers we've been following. We already talked about the potential two-way player in Kurt Hall. Edison Faulo is now an established major league pitcher, but not necessarily anything more than a slightly above replacement level pitcher. 6-12 this year with a 4.29 ERA. I guess he was 2.1 wins above replacement after being 2.8 wins above replacement a year ago. So probably minimizing the effectiveness of the left-hander a little bit. He is a one-time All-Star season ago. Over the course of his career, 96 ERA plus and 98 FIP minus does indicate that he is a pretty average major league pitcher, but admittedly average is still above replacement level. And Kazuki Asadi, a international free agent signing from 2038, is now the number 22 prospect in baseball. Spent the full year in A-ball, 3-7 with a 4.33 ERA. Did strike out 10.4 batters per 9 innings, but his strikeout to walk ratio was a not very impressive 2.2. Certainly looks like he could be a solid major league pitcher. Probably worst case scenario for him is a back of the rotation starter. And if he really develops all 5 of the pitches that we think he can, and he reaches his full potential, he could certainly be a good middle of the rotation starter and maybe even a solid number 2 if things worked out well. And we'll turn now from the prospects to some more established major leaguers, several of whom have been in our organization at times. One who's never been in our organization is the knuckleballer Andres Rojas. We looked at him in the draft many years ago. He continues to have a very good major league career. 13-8 with a 3.82 ERA for the Yankees this year, a 4.8 WAR. He is a 9-time All-Star Buehler, to go with a Cy Young Award a decade ago at the early stages of his career. Looking at what he's done over the major leagues, 176 and 114 record. He's going to turn 35 in a little over a month. 3.24 career ERA, 65.1 WAR. Led the league in wins once, innings pitched twice, strikeouts once, ERA once, BABIP once, WHIP once, strikeout to walk ratio once, FIP minus once, WAR twice, and quality start percentage 3 times. Rojas at this point still signed for another 2 years plus a potential vesting option in his age 37 season with the Yankees right now. With the way he is pitching, it's not inconceivable, looking at what he did this past year and looking at his still strong ratings, that he will be making a pretty solid case to be inducted in Cooperstown when all is said and done with Rojas' career as a knuckleballer. Joe Lewin, former farmhand in our system that we traded to Oakland. Wow, at this point, closing in on a decade ago. And he is now only 28 years old. We traded him when he was young. He was a prize draft pick of ours. 12-8 with a 4.19 ERA this year. He has certainly developed into a good, solid major league pitcher. About 16% above average in terms of his ERA plus, and similar if you think about his FIP minus. Put up a 27 WAR over the course of his career. Not necessarily as outstanding. The last 3 years, he's kind of averaged about a 3 WAR per season. His first 3 years in the majors, he was averaging over a 5 WAR a season. So looks like he's settling in as a good, solid major league starter. Certainly someone that you could help build a rotation around. Tim Killeen is a guy we traded away several years ago. Always were concerned about his lack of control. He actually did not pitch in the majors this past season and put up a 5.27 ERA while walking 29 batters and allowing 10 homers in just 54 2/3 innings in AAA. He is a guy who's arbitration eligible with a number of about 2.5 for this season upcoming, given that he didn't pitch in the majors at all, and he had a 2-12 record in AAA ball. His career could definitely be ending sooner rather than later if he doesn't start performing a bit better. And last but not least is Chase Dora, a member of our last 3 World Series championship teams with the Oakland A's in 2036, 2038, and 2040. Had to let him hit free agency this past year, where he signed a 5-year, $117 million deal with the Dodgers. For a guy for his mid to late 30s, that seemed like more years and more dollars than we could possibly spend in Oakland. Did have some injury issues this past year, but when all was said and done, it was a vintage Dora season, just in an abbreviated form. 7-5 record, 3.19 ERA, and he put up a 2.7 WAR with a strong ERA plus and FIP minus for the Los Angeles Dodgers organization. And last, but certainly not least, as far as the former players, I will check in on some hitters who spent time with our organization. Sergio Figueroa was a prospect we traded away about 8.5 years ago. He has become an established major leaguer with the Houston Astros, but a pretty average offensive player with a 98 WRC plus and only about half a win above replacement level. Respectable major league bat, an okay glove, good instincts on the base paths, but not a ton of speed. He's a guy who is going to be heading to free agency this coming season. I would think he would be hard pressed to get the $14.1 million that I believe he probably got in his last arbitration eligible season from the Astros this year. Has been an all-star. Also won a Silver Slugger and was a Wild Card Series MVP earlier in his career. Did have that really nice 2039 and 2038 seasons when he had WRC pluses of over 140. But he's been below 100 the last couple years, and he's turning 30 this offseason. Probably will make decent money as a free agent this year, but certainly will not be a team like our Oakland A's deciding to bring Mr. Figueroa on board. Byron Brain, the catcher, excellent defensively, but we had big concerns about his ability to make contact and avoid strikeouts. And he's had a useful career, just not necessarily the kind of batter that we want in our lineup. The left-handed hitting catcher, 25 home runs again for Miami. Got the batting average up to 200. The first time in a few years he's been at or above the Mendoza line, depending on how you define it. Once again, struck out 200 plus times. All added up to a 94 WRC plus, 2.2 WAR, driven by his strong defense. He's still signed for 2 more years of the 5-year deal that he signed with the Marlins organization 3 years back. And last, but certainly not least, let's check in on the franchise. Jake Ortega missed the end of last season with chronic back soreness, still recovering from that. He's wrecked physically as he was when he moved on from us. He ended up signing a 4-year, $146 million contract with the Yankees, but given his declining health, his increasing age, and his declining production, we decided that it was just not rational for us to try to bring him back at that kind of number. And his decline, unfortunately, continued this year with the Yankees organization. Batting average dropped to 249, played in just 107 games. Still a little bit of pop in the bat with 23 doubles and 13 homers, and still very good on the base paths, 35 for 38 running. But overall, offensively, a 102 WRC plus is, by definition, barely above average, and is 2.6 WAR, certainly one of the lowest numbers of his career. The Yankees did use him as an everyday left fielder, where he was outstanding defensively, but the wear and tear of being in the field probably factored into why he only played 107 games this year. He played 149 for us a year ago when we used him primarily as a designated hitter to try to keep him healthy, and was certainly a significantly more productive offensive player last year with that 118 WRC plus. Looking at Ortega, and he's definitely a player in decline. Batting averages have fallen from 312 to 303 to 264 to 249 over the last 4 years. And you can see his OPS has gone from over 900 to over 800 to the mid-700s over these past 3 years. The 2.6 WAR that he put up in 107 games is the second worst of his career, excluding his September call-up in 2031. And the only year that was lower than that was 2037, when he played just 61 games for us and had a 2.4 WAR. So unfortunately, it seems like Ortega's decline continues. He is a 2-time MVP, Rookie of the Year, Gold Glove winner, All-Star, Silver Slugger, multiple-time World Series champion, and multiple-time playoff series MVP. That being said, at 34 years old, with the way his career is trending, his career batting average just dipped below 300 with a 55.6 WAR. I don't know that the franchise is going to ultimately end up as a Hall of Famer when all is said and done. We'll hope that he can bounce back a bit in these coming years with the Yankees, but nobody's ever beaten Father Time, and given the slow decline in his skills, the fact that he is very injury prone, and he's going to be 35 by next August, makes me think that we have almost certainly seen the best of Jake Ortega in this game. And before we move on for our annual review of some of the top prospects in our farm system, some bonus coverage for a longtime supporter of the channel, Stanley Rosella, who was interested in a little more information about what's going on with some of the other organizations in baseball over the 18 years that we've been playing. We do tend to, when we get into award season, dip in on some of the more prominent individual players. But here we'll just take a little bit deeper look at the history of some teams. We know our Oakland A's history quite well. Definitely struggled the early seasons trying to turn the franchise around, but have over the last decade plus been a perennial playoff team with 4 world championships. Consistently strong attendance. We've more than doubled our attendance from the early days of this playthrough. The issue is always whether or not we can be profitable. Made about $1.2 million this last year, so even a little less than I had anticipated. But we've had several years where we've actually lost money over the course of this playthrough. The most profitable year we ever had was the $27 million we made when, out of the blue, with the lowest payroll in all of baseball, we defeated the Los Angeles Dodgers to win our first world championship in 2029. Speaking of those Los Angeles Dodgers, we'll take a look at how the team that has often had the biggest budget and the biggest payroll in all of baseball has done. And they were on an outstanding playoff streak that started back in 2013 and continued to 2034. So a 22-year playoff run that did end with a second title in that run in 2034. They didn't win the title in this universe in 2024. But they were a very consistent playoff team with huge attendance, huge payroll, and tons of profitability. The profitability remains incredible. They've made $156 million and $128 million the last couple of years, but they have not had a winning season since 2034, despite often having one of the biggest budgets in baseball, although that has definitely been pared back in recent years. Taking a look at another one of the very big market teams, the New York Yankees. They actually had some rough years at the start of this playthrough, but although they missed the playoffs in 2041, have once again become a perennial playoff contender. Unfortunately, their World Series drought, as far as being a champion, still dates back to 2009, but consistently one of the top payrolls in baseball, and have consistently generated pretty significant profits over the years. Go out to Queens to take a look at the New York Mets, and they have pretty consistently been a playoff team over most of the last decade as well. Did win a world championship. The budget, as far as their payroll, has come down a bit from peak levels, but generated a nice profit this year after struggling with profitability for a few seasons in a row. Another big market club, the Boston Red Sox, and they have actually basically become a pretty small market team. They have not made the playoffs since 2029. which is also the last time that they had a winning season. So they haven't won more than the 80 games they won here in 2041 over the past decade plus. You can see the payroll of $122 million this past year is in Oakland A's territory, making tons of money. So whoever took over the club from John Henry is probably happy that they remain extremely profitable, but the fans in Boston unlikely to be pleased that they haven't finished in first place or made the playoffs since 2029. Chicago Cubs were a very consistent playoff team for about the first decade of this playthrough, but haven't made the playoffs since 2033, and their payroll has shrunk dramatically. We're just $52 million a year ago, which I'm guessing was the lowest in baseball. They almost doubled it this past year, but still a very low payroll, but they are making insane amounts of money. Turning to a team that started this playthrough from a pretty bad position, similar to ours, the Chicago White Sox. They were much better in this fictional world, going 66-96 in 2024. But the Pale-Hose have become a pretty consistent playoff team over the last close to 15 years, generally running a pretty robust budget. Profitability has been variable for them. They haven't won a world championship yet, but they are the team that took us out of the playoffs this year as we were going for a repeat. Our division rival, Texas Rangers, were for a time one of the best teams in baseball. They won a couple of World Series in 2033 and 2035, and those of you who have followed them over the years will remember this 4-season stretch from 2033 to 2036 where we could just never get past them in the American League West standings. They continue to have a pretty robust payroll. They continue to make pretty significant money, but they did slip to 65-97 this year, their first losing season in almost a decade. And we'll check in on what the future has held for three last teams before we finish off. The Atlanta Braves had a bit of a dry spell in the early 2030s, but otherwise have been a consistent playoff team through most of this playthrough. Have not won a World Series yet, but a very strong budget team, good attendance, and pretty good profitability, although they just barely eked out profitability this year when they missed the playoffs and went just 77-85. The Seattle Mariners, I know that we have some Mariners fans among the worldwide scouting department, haven't been to the playoffs since 2030 at this point. One of the lowest budgets, one of the lowest payrolls consistently for close to a decade in all of baseball. And they haven't had a winning season since the last time they were in the playoffs in 2030. They are making some money, though. And last, but certainly not least, the San Francisco Giants. They finally won the World Series this year, their first in 27 years after they had the 3 and 5 years in the early 2010s. They've made the playoffs consistently over the last 8 seasons and finally got the job done right this postseason. Haven't done it with the biggest payrolls in baseball, but a solid payroll, pretty solid attendance, and they have been consistently profitable. Pretty impressive even when you think about some of the other teams. It looks like the worst they've done is making about $24 million over these last 18 years since we started this playthrough. Actually, one last bonus team before we move on to our farm system. The Kansas City Royals had a lot of success for a while and been one of the top teams in the American League. And see, they made the playoffs 9 out of 10 seasons, but the last 3 years they've missed the playoffs. And they never actually won a World Series championship, despite a couple of 100-win seasons, including a 111-win year in 2032. when they won the fourth of 5 consecutive AL Central titles. But we'll now turn our attention back to the team that we really care about, and that is our Oakland Athletics. Minor league system now ranks 6th overall. We do have 9 top 100 prospects, though, led by Luis Villarreal, number 17 prospect in baseball now. May remember that he is the guy that we picked up last offseason when we traded away Gallic, who we've since reunited with as a rental, and Daniel Blanco. And Villarreal developing really well this year. Started in A ball where he was 4-2, then went 6-3 with a mid-3s ERA and high A ball. And towards the end of the year, before he turned 22, we promoted him to Double-A. 0-2 record for Midland, but he did have a 2.65 ERA with 21 strikeouts over 17 innings in his debut at the Double-A level. The lefty is the number 17 prospect in baseball. Honestly, looks like he could be a useful major league pitcher already. We will continue to take his development at a measured pace, given the talent that we have at the major league level, but certainly would expect that Luis could be helping us possibly as early as a September call-up next year. Talked about Chad Evans in our last episode when we did our annual review, split the year between Las Vegas and Oakland, and also missed the last few months of the year with shoulder inflammation that he is still recovering from. Think that the number 40 prospect in baseball, if healthy, should certainly be a contributor at the major league level this upcoming season. Jacoby Manelli, an IAFA signing from 2038, is the number 42 prospect in baseball now. Started out the year with our DSL team, and then we quickly moved him up to rookie ball in the Arizona League. Put up a 154 WRC plus as a 20-year-old in rookie ball for us, and would certainly expect Manelli to start next year in A ball, and would think that by this time next year, when he's 21 years old, hopefully he'll already have experience at the high A level and be ready to make that jump to Double-A and ultimately Triple-A. Speaking of Triple-A, Mike Homer, the two-way player, former second-round draft pick in 2036, 11-5 with a 4.09 ERA in his first full year as a pitcher in Triple-A. Looks like he can be a back-of-the-rotation starter for us or a useful arm out of the pen. Wouldn't say that he looks like he's going to be special as a pitcher, but certainly seems like he can be a functional major leaguer. Can kind of say the same thing about the way his bat looks. Question a little bit how many walks he's going to draw and how many home runs he's going to hit. But he is a very versatile and solid defensive player. Was not nearly as good with the bat this year as he was with the glove. 266 average, 15 homers, and 69 ribbies in AAA, but in the offense-happy PCL, that only added up to a 79 WRC plus, and he was actually slightly above replacement level. But given his defensive versatility, given the fact that he is a two-way player who we think can certainly contribute on the mound and potentially as a left-handed hitter could contribute against right-handed pitching, it's not inconceivable that Homer could be competing for a roster spot coming out of spring training next year. And even if he doesn't make the 26-man roster, would certainly expect Homer to graduate to the major leagues at some point next year. Devin Carrick, a right fielder who was a 6th-round pick in 2038, is now the number 76 prospect in baseball. Hasn't been incredibly productive in the minor leagues. You can see over the last 3 seasons, he's never even been a league average offensive player as measured by WRC+. Still think, though, that he could have potentially outstanding home run power. Will likely advance him to high A ball to start next year, and would think that he'll probably be playing in Double-A by the end of the year. John Bramlett was a first-round pick of ours in 2040, the high school pitcher out of St. Petersburg High School, listed as the number 80 prospect in baseball, 5-4 with a 3.18 ERA and nearly 12 strikeouts per 9 innings in the ACL this year. He'll be turning 20 this winter and will likely begin next year in A-ball for us. Another young starting pitching prospect, Jerry Stevenson, 7th-round pick from 2039. Only pitched 6 games in rookie ball this year, 2-1 with a 1.57 earned run average. Unfortunately, did have acute elbow soreness, which cost him 3 months in most of the rookie league season. He's going to be 21 years old by about the time next season begins. And after parts of 3 seasons in rookie ball, presumably will be graduating to A-ball. David Ibarra is one of the top pitching prospects in our organization, IAFA signing in 2037. Outstanding fastball and a rapidly improving splitter. Split last year between high A, double A, and triple A. Combined to pitch 58 games among those 3 levels, was a positive WAR player at each level, although his 5.40 ERA in 8 1/3 innings in AAA ball certainly doesn't impress particularly much. But think that his stuff could be absolutely outstanding with above average movement and decent control. He's also durable and pretty solid stamina for a reliever. Throws in the mid to high 90s already. We'll talk about what he'll be doing in the development lab this offseason shortly, but certainly looking forward to see what Ibarra becomes. And last, but certainly not least, the left-handed reliever Roque de la Paz pitched just 12 innings in the DSL for us this year, but did have a 1.50 ERA in that limited sample size. We think both his fastball and slider could be absolutely incredible. He's going to turn 20 years old in about a month and a half, and would expect that the lefty, now that he's 20 years old and has a little bit of experience in the DSL, will be in A-ball when next season begins. Have 6 more prospects that rank between 101 and 200, so we'll visit those prospects as well. Jesus Sauceda, you may remember him. We picked him up in a trade with St. Louis a couple of years ago at this point. Still hasn't made it out of rookie ball, but was a league average offensive player ultimately this year when all was said and done. Hit 300 and 277 at-bats. Only 5 home runs, but we still think his home run power could ultimately be incredible. And although he's got a lot of experience at this point, he's barely 19 years old. He was playing this past season as an 18-year-old. St. Louis promoted him out of their international complex before we picked him up in a trade. Otherwise, we would have likely been a little more conservative about starting his professional career. But as I said, he got up to be a league average offensive player in the DSL this year. Was above replacement level, and he did it all at 18 years old, so seems like hopefully no harm, no foul as far as his development. Third baseman Nelson Romero, former 4th-round draft pick, split the year between high A and double A, was above average offensively in high A, below average offensively in double A. Looks like he could be a useful player at the major league level. The bat, kind of an average-ish major league bat, I'm guessing, in a best-case scenario when all is said and done. But he's versatile defensively and also solid defensively, although in a perfect world we'd prefer more range. So certainly seems like someone who could be a useful utility infielder at the very least down the line. Jesus Ramos, 23-year-old in AAA, made his major league debut at the end of this season, 10-14 with an ERA of over 5 in AAA for us. Doesn't necessarily look like he's going to have an incredible profile. Certainly a nice return at this point on an 8th-round draft pick of a high school pitcher. But Ramos, to me, kind of has the profile of someone, particularly given that he is listed right now as the 151st prospect in baseball, that we might be willing to include in a trade sometime over the coming year or two if we need to. And actually, he's the 130th prospect in baseball. 151st is Chris Tabat, first round pick from 2040. Has struggled in his first year and a half in rookie ball, and he's 20 years old now, so he's a little older for a guy who was drafted out of high school only a year and a half ago. Still like where we think his potential is, but at some point going to have to start seeing results on the field, given that he's going to be 21 by the middle of next season. Probably going to see if he can sink or swim in A-ball next year. Juan Ramirez, another guy who's closer to the majors, IAFA signing from 2036, had an absolutely ridiculous season in AAA for us this year. All Big Thunder did was have 68 home runs and 155 ribbies while hitting 309, 159 WRC plus and a 5 WAR. Certainly think that left-handed bat could be an asset for us this upcoming year against right-handed pitching. We've talked about in previous episodes that we're going to be almost certainly losing our left-handed hitting catcher, Mr. Mendoza, which potentially puts us in a situation where his replacement at catcher, Jonah Richards, is the only left-handed bat consistently in our lineup. And given the way Ramirez hit this year in AAA and his profile against right-handed pitching, he could certainly be in the mix to perhaps fight for some time at DH for us this year. Like his durability, and certainly based on what he's done over the past few seasons, I think this is a guy who deserves a chance to see if he can hit some home runs at the major league level. And our final top 100 prospect, another name, those of you who help out in the international amateur free agent signing period will remember Tawase Zuabri, the catcher who was one of our prime IAFA signings in 2040, made his professional debut this year, hitting 251 with a 65 WRC plus in the DSL as an 18-year-old. Would think that he'll probably be in the DSL again next year. Not inconceivable that maybe towards the end of the year we'd see what he could do in the Arizona League, and hopefully is not too many seasons away from getting a chance in A-ball for us. And there's lots of other interesting prospects around the organization, but we'll mention 3 that could have a potential impact for us in the not too distant future. One is the catcher Omari Cephas, 13th round pick from 2036, but the bat looks like it's developed where it could be usable at the major league level, and he's got a decent glove, although his arm is not exceptional. Spent most of this year in AA, but we did promote him to AAA at the end of the year, where he put up a 118 WRC plus for us. We talked last episode about Hidetaka Ogata, our outstanding defensive backup catcher, who's just not really a major league hitter, and the fact that he's getting into his arbitration years now and is going to be making $1.8 million next year. Although Ogata is certainly better defensively than Cephas. Cephas is no slouch except for his arm, and we do think that Cephas could potentially be a more interesting offensive player for us. So haven't made a decision one way or another as to what we'll do with Ogata, but if we do move on from him, Cephas could be competing to be our backup catcher next year. Another left-handed power hitter who could be in the mix for a roster spot, Damani Hasbury, a 17th round draft pick in 2036. And this past season, he combined for 42 homers and 106 ribbies between AA and AAA. Was a well above average offensive player at both levels. And between the likes of Hasbury and Homer and Ramirez, we've got some left-handed hitters in AAA who are not too far off. being able to help us. Last is a guy we haven't talked about in a while, Coy Simmons. You may remember him, the college player we picked in the first round out of Southern Mississippi in 2038. And his development has unfortunately been pretty slow. He's going to be turning 25 years old soon. He did make it to AAA this year, but he has not been a particularly impressive offensive player, below average offensively in both AA and AAA. Like his decent outfield range, like the fact that he can play all three outfield positions competently to well defensively, slightly above average speed. Unfortunately, the bat just really hasn't developed the way that we might have hoped when we picked him 29th overall. Another left-handed hitter who could be helping us at the major league level in the not-too-distant future, but unless he reaches every ounce of hitting potential that we think he has, it's getting hard for me to imagine that Coy Simmons is going to be anything much more than a fourth or fifth outfielder for us for a few years, and quite possibly someone we would move on from as soon as he's eligible to be making over the major league minimum in arbitration. And not that we anticipate being major players this offseason when free agency does begin in several weeks, but we'll take a look at some of the top potential players on the market. Our old stopper, Mike Orozco, going to be a free agent. The guy we rented this year is a closer, Juan Padilla, going to be a free agent. And then another closer, Akamai Malachi, closed for the New York Mets this year, picked up 26 saves for them, and he will be on the market as well. So three relievers highlighting the class of potential free agent pitchers here in the 2041 to 2042 offseason. Hitter-wise, no surprise, our current catcher, Jorge Mendoza, looks by far the most interesting player out there. 29 years old still. Joe Wooden, a 32-year-old third baseman, excellent defensively, perennial Gold Glove All-Star and Silver Slugger winner. Although the bat, outside of the home run power, is looking a little less special than it used to, as he's now 32 years old. That said, he still did hit 32 home runs this past year. Don't see ourselves playing for any of these guys at the higher end of the market. Sergio Figueroa, who we talked about earlier this episode, our old buddies Andy Toribio, Mike Alanis, Steve Allison, Jaden Boakai, among others who will be free agents in a few weeks, almost certainly. But the primary reason we won't likely be significant players in free agency, well, I guess there's two primary reasons. First and most important is that we got a pretty darn good roster that just won 108 games and don't have any glaring holes to fill. So that, I would like to say, is the main reason we're not going to be very active in free agency, but certainly an important offshoot of that is the fact that we're not going to have a lot of money to spend. We're going to need to find some money to invest in scouting and player development to continue investing in our highly regarded farm system. And that's likely going to mean that we're going to have to move on from some players this offseason in the trade market to free up some salary space. So with that, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, we're going to visit exactly what the markets look like for some players that we might consider moving on from. Chuck Huntley, our longtime closer who got demoted out of that role this year and ultimately didn't even make the playoff roster, going to be set to be making over $7 million potentially in arbitration this year. I'm guessing it's probably not going to be huge demand for him at that level, but he is an experienced closer with a decent profile. Doesn't look like there's going to be anyone incredibly compelling offered to him, and I'll spend more time offline looking at some of these options. Edgar Nieves, left fielder from the Phillies organization, has a pretty high ceiling compared to some of these people. He's actually someone I'd consider. We could use another captain personality in the clubhouse. He's a competent corner outfielder, but he's got really good speed, pretty decent looking contact hitter, put up a 111 WRC plus in very limited major league action this year. Honestly, I think he's more of a fourth or fifth outfielder, which isn't a huge need for us. In a perfect world, I think I'd rather package Huntley with other players to potentially get a more impactful potential prospect in return. But there's certainly good to know that there's some value and options out there if we do move on from Mr. Huntley. Unlike Huntley, I think I'm at least considering bringing back Mike Gallick next season, particularly with some key starters we have that are bouncing back, hopefully from injuries. But you can see Gallick, the list of potential options if we were to move on from him is much more extensive. So clearly a lot more interest in Gallick. Again, I'll spend a lot more time offline between now and the next episode thinking about some of these trade options. Julio Izaguirre is a IAFA signing from just a few months ago who was not great in rookie DSL ball with the Jays, but also was only 17 years old while he was there. Looks like a interesting defensive player with a potentially interesting bat if he fully developed. Again, I'm just going purely by the peak star ratings for these guys that I'm looking at quickly with you here now. Jim Kenney, left-hand hitting right fielder. Pretty interesting bat, but that low leadership, loyalty, adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence combination, even though he's listed as the number 94 prospect in baseball, will likely give me significant pause. Can see there's also a fair amount of catchers here, and there were some catchers that were listed when we marketed Huntley as well, who certainly will deserve a little more investigation, given that we could be moving on from Mr. Ogata as our backup, and not 100% sure that we want Mr. Cephas to be our backup catcher next year. So bringing another catcher into the organization who's young is another path that we could consider following. Jake Mendick, like Huntley, is a pretty solid left-handed reliever. He's been more productive than Huntley over the last season and a half at this point, but he is wrecked physically, and he's also a guy who's looking to make around $5 million next year. My hunch is there may be a little more trade value with Mendick than Huntley. Yeah, definitely seems that way. Looks like Mendick's trade value is kind of closer to where we are with Gallick. You can see the youngster Julio Izaguirre still is, at least according to our scout, one of the higher potential guys we could potentially get in return from him. And a lot of young players, including some young catchers on this list that we could investigate if we were to move on from Mendick. The last couple players that we'll check in on are a couple of infielders. Amari Alcindor, who's been a utility infielder for us for several years. We're hoping with the contract we gave him, 10 years, $64 million a few years ago, that he was going to develop into an everyday starter. That really hasn't happened yet. I'm guessing the trade value for him, given that contract, may be somewhat less than most that we've seen so far. Actually, not the case. Interestingly, it looks like our former closer, Chuck Huntley, has the most restricted trade value of any of these guys. The list here for Alcindor actually similar to what we saw from the likes of Gallick and Mendick. And last but not least, don't love the idea of moving on from Alejandro Fleelandine, IAFA signing of ours from over 14 years ago, who has had a really nice career with us, four-time All-Star, won a Silver Slugger, member of our last 3 World Championship teams. He's in the final year of his contract. We've got a team option for him at $5 million for this upcoming season, and he's coming off of the worst offensive season he's had basically since he made his major league debut in 2034. Would certainly open up a bit of a defensive hole for us at shortstop if we were to move on from Landine, but he did not have a particularly good statistical year this past season defensively and is going to be a year older by next year. So definitely someone that we are thinking about moving on from. And it looks like Landine, there's actually pretty significant demand for him. Izaguirre, who we've seen on previous lists, Juan Moreno, another young infielder with potential. Like his range, like his speed, he's smart. He was the 32nd overall pick in the 2040 draft. Looks like if he fully develops, he could be a left-handed hitting middle infielder with a slightly above average bat. Got a lot of work to do, but he's certainly an interesting prospect. You can see some more experienced players on this list as well, in addition to some other prospects. Our old buddy Byron Brain, if we wanted to bring a left-handed hitting catcher who hits a lot of home runs and strikes out a lot back, we could do that. Jesus Salido, 23-year-old second baseman, nice glove. Not necessarily a great bat, but still a guy who could at least hit some home runs while playing pretty good middle infield defense. So he's interesting. Kimani Ibekwe, guy we almost picked up in trade and then free agency over the last couple seasons. Led the National League this past year with 52 doubles and a bit of a resurgence with a 110 WRC+. But he's still signed for another 4 years, and he's 34 years old at this point. Don't know that Ibekwe makes sense for us to pursue, but you can see that there are a lot of potential options if we decide to move on from Flea Landine. So going to be some interesting decisions in the trade market that we will be working on between now and the next episode. Could certainly think about trading some other players as well. One that I mentioned, I think, in the previous episode was whether we'd want to move on from Joe Harmon, given some of those left-handed hitting first base outfield types that we talked about earlier in this episode that aren't too far away. And certainly there is an option if we package a few of these players together, we could probably get even more interesting prospects than some of the ones that we've seen. So going to be some interesting decisions that we'll be working on between now and the next episode. If you have any initial thoughts on which direction you'd go, always helpful to hear from the Worldwide Scouting Department in the comments section. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.